Hi everyone, welcome to Emma, a true infidelity story. I'm excited to share a new story with you that there's a moment when you know you're at a crossroads, but you don't know if you can go left or right. I was standing at that moment, now alone, just me and my decision. Everything else could wait. My name's Evelyn, and I'm 36 years old. I'm not the kind of person who stands out in a crowd. Average height. Average build, the kind of woman you'd pass on the street without a second glance. My life's been quiet, predictable, safe. But today was different. Today I was standing in my living room, staring at my dog, Max, who had just done something so unexpected that my entire world felt like it was tilting. Max is a golden retriever, the kind of dog that's always happy, always wagging his tail, always there to remind you that life isn't as complicated as you make it out to be. But this morning he wasn't wagging his tail. He was sitting perfectly still, his eyes locked on mine like he was waiting for me to do something, and then out of nowhere he did it. He pushed the door open with his nose and walked out just like that. No bark, no whine, no hesitation. He just laughed and I froze. My heart started pounding, my hands went cold and I couldn't move. Max had never done anything like this before. He's the kind of dog who waits for permission, who stays close, who doesn't take risks. But today he walked out that door like he had somewhere to be, and I was left standing there, staring at the empty space where he'd been. I didn't know what to do. My mind was racing, but my body wouldn't move. Should I go after him? Should I wait for him to come back? What if he didn't come back? What if something happened to him? The thoughts kept coming faster and faster, until I felt like I was drowning in them. I could hear my own breathing, shallow and uneven, and I realized I was holding on to the edge of the couch, like it was the only thing keeping me upright. I felt small, weak, like I wasn't capable of handling this, like I wasn't capable of handling anything, and that's when it hit me. This wasn't just about Max. This was about me, about the way I've always played it safe, always stayed in my comfort zone, always avoided taking risks. Max had just done something I would never do. He'd stepped into the unknown without looking back, and I was standing here paralyzed by fear. The more I thought about it, the more everything seemed to blur together. Should I just go for it? Should I step out of the safe space I've built for myself? The clock was ticking, but I couldn't bring myself to move. I kept replaying the moment in my head. Max pushing the door open, walking out, leaving me behind. It felt like a metaphor for something bigger, something I couldn't quite put into words. And then slowly it started to sink in. It wasn't just the risk anymore. It wasn't about what could happen if I failed. It was about what would happen if I didn't try, if I stayed where it was safe forever. And I couldn't live like that. Not anymore. I took a deep breath and closed my eyes. The moment stretched endlessly. But then I felt my hand move, my body reacting before my mind. I couldn't stop it. I didn't want to anymore. I grabbed my coat, slipped on my shoes and stepped out the door. The air was cold, sharp against my skin, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. But I kept walking. I didn't know where Max had gone, but I knew I had to find him. I had to prove to myself that I could do this, that I could face the unknown, that I could take a risk. The streets were quiet, empty, except for the occasional car passing by. I called out Max's name, my voice trembling, but there was no response. I kept walking, my steps quickening, my breath coming in short, uneven bursts. And then just as I was about to give up, I saw him. He was sitting at the end of the block, his tail wagging slowly like he'd been waiting for me all along. I felt a rush of relief, but it was quickly replaced by something else, something deeper, more profound. I had done it. I had stepped out of my comfort zone, faced my fear, and come out on the other side. When I opened my eyes, the world was still the same, but I wasn't. I had taken the leap, and whether or not I succeeded, I had finally broken free, and for the first time I knew that was enough. The rain was coming down, hard, pounding against the windows like it was trying to get in. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at my phone, my hands shaking. The screen was lit up with a single message, a Trask, I need to see you tonight. Rocky was from him, from Archie, my ex, the one I hadn't spoken to in over a year. The one I thought I'd finally moved on from. But here he was popping back into my life like he'd never left. And just like that, all the progress I'd made, all the healing I'd done, felt like it was crumbling around me. I didn't know what to do. My mind was racing, my heart pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. Should I go? Should I ignore him? What if this was a mistake? What if it wasn't? The questions kept swirling faster and faster, until I felt like I was drowning in them. I could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on me, heavy and suffocating. This wasn't just about Archie. This was about me, about the way I'd always put others before myself. Always let my heart lead me into situations I knew weren't good for me. And now here I was right back at that same crossroads. I stood up, pacing the room. My thoughts a tangled mess. Part of me wanted to see him, to hear what he had to say. Maybe he'd changed. Maybe he'd realized what he'd lost. But another part of me, a louder part, was screaming at me to stay away, to protect myself, to not fall back into the same old patterns that had left me broken before. I felt torn, pulled in 3 different directions, and I didn't know which way to go. The rain kept falling, the sound of it almost soothing, but it did nothing to calm the storm inside me. I kept replaying the last time I'd seen Archie, the way he'd looked at me, the way he'd said, "Rocky, I just need some space, Rocky, space." That's what he'd called it, but it had felt like something else, like an ending. And now, after all this time, he wanted to see me. Like, what could he possibly have to say that would make any of this okay? I sat back down on the bed, my phone still in my hand, the message still staring back at me. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, staring into the unknown. One step forward, and I could fall. One step back, and I'd be safe. But safe didn't feel like enough anymore. Safe felt empty, and I was so tired of feeling empty. I took a deep breath, my fingers hovering over the screen. I didn't know what to say. I didn't even know if I wanted to say anything. But then, before I could stop myself, I typed out a reply. A Trask, where a Trask. I hit send before I could change my mind, my heart racing even faster. Now there was no turning back. I'd made my choice. The response came almost immediately. A Trask, the park, our spot, 9 p.m. Rocky car spot. Those words hit me like a punch to the gut. The park, the bench by the lake. The place where we'd spent so many nights, talking, laughing, dreaming. The place where it had all ended. And now he wanted to meet me there. Tonight I looked at the clock. It was already 7:45. I had half an hour to decide if I was really going to do this, half an hour to figure out if I was strong enough to face him, to face the past, to face myself. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, staring into the unknown. One step forward, and I could fall. One step back, and I'd be safe. But safe didn't feel like enough anymore. Safe felt empty, and I was so tired of feeling empty. I grabbed my coat, my hands still shaking, and headed for the door. The rain was still coming down, but I didn't care. I needed to do this. I needed to know, for me, not for him. For me, the park was empty when I got there, the rain keeping everyone else inside. I could see the bench in the distance, the lake behind it, the water dark and choppy. And there he was, Archie, sitting on the bench, his head down, his hands clasped together. He looked up when he heard me coming, his eyes meeting mine. And for a moment I couldn't breathe. I walked over slowly, my heart pounding, my mind racing. What was I doing here? What was I expecting? I didn't know, but I knew I had to find out. I sat down next to him, the rain still falling around us, and waited. He didn't say anything at first, just stared out at the lake, his jaw tight, his shoulders tense. And then finally he spoke. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice quiet, almost a whisper. "Ask for everything." See, I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to feel. All I knew was that this moment, this decision, this risk, it was mine. And no matter what happened next, I'd taken it. For me, the alarm blared sharp and insistent, pulling me out of a dream. I couldn't quite remember. I slapped at the clock, silencing it, and lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling. My chest felt tight, like I'd been running in my sleep, and my mind was already racing ahead to the day ahead. Today was the day I'd been dreading, the day I'd been avoiding, the day I couldn't put off any longer. Today, I had to decide. I sat up, rubbing my face, trying to shake off the heaviness that clung to me. My apartment was quiet, too quiet, and the silence only made the thoughts in my head louder. I glanced at the calendar on the wall, the red circle around today's date, glaring back at me. It had been there for weeks, a constant reminder of what was coming. And now it was here. No more excuses, no more delays. I had to make a choice. I got up, my legs, feeling like they were made of lead, and shuffled to the kitchen. The coffee maker gurgled as I poured myself a cup, the smell of it sharp and bitter. I took a sip, wincing at the heat, and leaned against the counter, staring out the window. The sky was gray, the kind of gray that felt heavy, like it was pressing down on everything. It matched my mood perfectly. The choice was simple, at least on the surface. Stay or go. That was it, but it wasn't simple. Not really. Staying meant safety, comfort, the familiar. It meant knowing what each day would bring, knowing where I stood, knowing I wouldn't fail. But it also meant settling. It meant staying in a job that didn't challenge me, in a life that didn't excite me, in a routine that felt more like a cage than a comfort. Going, though going meant risk, meant stepping into the unknown, taking a chance on something that might not work out. It meant failure was a real possibility, and that terrified me. I set the coffee cup down, my hands trembling slightly. I'd been going over this in my head for weeks, months even, and I still didn't have an answer. Every time I thought I'd made up my mind, the doubts would creep back in, whispering in my ear, reminding me of all the things that could go wrong. What if I wasn't good enough? What if I couldn't handle it? What if I failed? The questions were endless, and they never seemed to stop. I walked back to the bedroom, my mind still spinning, and sat down on the edge of the bed. The clock on the nightstand ticked loudly, each second feeling like a countdown. I didn't have much time. I had to decide, but how? How could I choose between the safe, predictable path and the risky, uncertain one? How could I know which one was right? I closed my eyes, trying to quiet the noise in my head, but it was no use. The thoughts kept coming faster and faster, until I felt like I was drowning in them. I stood up, pacing the room, my heart pounding in my chest. I needed to do something, anything to break free from this paralysis. But what? And then suddenly it hit me. It wasn't about choosing the right path. It was about choosing to move forward. It was about taking a step, any step, and trusting that I could handle whatever came next. It wasn't about avoiding failure. It was about embracing the possibility of success. I stopped pacing, my breath coming in short, uneven bursts. I felt lighter, somehow like a weight had been lifted. I didn't have all the answers. I didn't know what would happen, but I knew I couldn't stay here, stuck in this limbo, afraid to take a chance. I had to move. I had to try. I grabbed my phone, my hands still shaking, and dialed the number I'd been avoiding for weeks. It rang once, twice, and then a voice answered. Atlas, hello. See, I took a deep breath, my heart racing, and said the words I'd been too afraid to say before. Astra, I'm in. I'll do it, SI. There was a pause on the other end, and then the voice replied. Rocky, are you sure? Sis, I didn't hesitate this time. Rocky, guess I'm sure. Sis, I hung up the phone, my hands still trembling. But for the first time in weeks I felt calm. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if I'd succeed or fail. But I knew I'd made the right choice for me, and that was enough. The envelope sat on the kitchen table unopened. I'd been staring at it for what felt like hours. My coffee gone cold, my hands clenched into fists. I wasn't supposed to be like this. I wasn't supposed to be here, sitting in this tiny apartment, staring at a piece of paper that could change everything. But here I was, and I couldn't bring myself to open it. I leaned back in my chair, running a hand through my hair. My heart was pounding, my stomach in knots. This wasn't just any envelope. This was the letter. The one I'd been waiting for. The one I'd been dreading. The one that would tell me whether I'd gotten into the program or not. The program I'd worked so hard for was the one I'd dreamed about for years. But now that the moment was here, I couldn't do it. I couldn't open it. What if it was a no? What if all that work, all those late nights, all those sacrifices had been for nothing? What if I wasn't good enough? The thoughts kept coming faster and faster, until I felt like I was drowning in them. I stood up, pacing the small kitchen, my mind racing. I needed to do something, anything to calm the storm inside me. But when I stopped in front of the window, staring out at the city below, the streets were busy, people rushing to work, honking life, moving on like nothing was wrong. But for me, everything felt like it was hanging in the balance. This letter, this stupid piece of paper, held my future in its hands, and I couldn't even bring myself to open it. I turned back to the table, my eyes landing on the envelope again. Looked so innocent, so ordinary. But it wasn't. It was everything. and I was terrified of what it might say. I sat back down, my hands trembling as I reached for the envelope. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands, feeling the weight of it. This was it. This was the moment I had to know. I had to face it no matter what it said. I took a deep breath, my fingers fumbling with the edge of the envelope. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, my breath coming in short, uneven bursts. This was it. This was the moment I had to know. I tore the envelope open, pulling out the letter inside. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely read the words, but I forced myself to focus. The first line jumped out at me. "We are pleased to inform you I." Stopped reading, my breath catching in my throat. I felt a rush of relief, of joy, of disbelief. I'd done it. I'd gotten in. But then just as quickly the doubt crept back in. What if I couldn't handle it? What if I wasn't good enough? What if I failed? I set the letter down, my hands still trembling. I didn't know what to feel. I didn't know what to do. This was everything I'd wanted, everything I'd worked for. But now that it was here, I wasn't sure I was ready for it. I stood up, pacing the kitchen again, my mind racing. This was it. This was my chance, but it was also a risk, a big one. And I didn't know if I was brave enough to take it. I